In May 1972, a trial began at the Old Bailey in London, which was to be the longest in English criminal history. In the dock stood a group of young men and women from a variety of backgrounds, accused of a wave of politically motivated bombings between 1968 and 1971. The majority of them had studied at Cambridge and Essex universities and were strongly influenced in their beliefs by the wave of revolutionary fervour which followed the international student protests of spring 1968. This is the story of that trial, in the words of those involved.
The Trial of the Angry Brigade by Graham White, with Juliet Stevenson, Kenneth Cranham and Mark Strong.
List of material employed in researching and reconstructing the 1972 trial of the Angry Brigade. Item: a pile of 13 aging blue foolscap legal pads. They are bent, the pages yellowing, the staples in their bindings brown with rust. Written on the cover of the first, in blue biro, is the title, R versus Greenfield, Court of Justice James, Old Bailey, May the 30th, 1972. For the prosecution, John Matthew leads the case.
Members of the jury, would you look at your chart sheet? You will see at the top of the first page, the Queen against, and then you will see the names of the defendants. The first of the defendants is James Greenfield. He is sitting in the front row, furthest from you in the dock, in the red shirt, and he is represented by Mr. Ian MacDonald, QC. Now, the next three defendants. Anna Mendelsohn in green, and next to her John Barker, and then Hilary Ann Creek. Members of the jury, those three defendants are representing themselves. That's something they do of their own choice in this case. They have a solicitor to help them, but he has, of course, no right of audience in this court. And therefore, as far as this court is concerned, they are representing themselves. Now, it is my task to tell you what this case is all about. The allegation in this case is that these defendants, calling themselves revolutionaries and anarchists, under various names, but most particularly as the Angry Brigade, sought to disrupt and attack the democratic society of Britain, with whose structure and politics they apparently disagree. To disrupt it by a wave of violent attacks over quite a lengthy period. That is by causing explosions aimed at the property of those whom they considered to be their political or social opponents.
Item: an A3 piece of paper. The edges of the paper are torn, and along the central fold is a partial tear. Down the left of the paper are 25 handwritten descriptions of geographical locations, with dates alongside them. The first entry reads Spanish Embassy, London. The date alongside this is the 3rd of March, 1968. The final entry reads Territorial Army Drill Hall, Holloway, 15th of August, 1971. Along the top of the paper, reading from left to right, are category headings describing the nature of the explosive devices used in each incident.
Between March 1968 and August 1971, on 19 occasions, explosions were caused by homemade bombs which damaged buildings, mostly in the London area, but some in Birmingham and Manchester. On a further 6 occasions, attempts were made to cause explosions against property, the bombs either failing to explode or being discovered before they could be detonated. It is the case for the Crown that these 25 incidents involving bombs are all linked, in that they all have so many common factors that they are all clearly associated. Therefore, the responsibility for them can be shown to emanate from a common source. All the defendants, it is alleged, were part or parties to that common source, and the Crown will seek to prove that these defendants were parties to this conspiracy of violence. The 4 defendants were arrested in a flat in Amherst Road, Stoke Newington, on the 20th of August 1971. As you will hear, at the address were discovered an arsenal of guns, as well as explosives and other materials, which made it a factory for the manufacture of bombs. Also discovered was a printing press, an object which will prove crucial in this case. as many of the devices listed on the chart were accompanied by communiques claiming responsibility, some of which we will show to have been printed on this particular press. At Amherst Road were also found a mass of documents. You will hear of papers containing the names, addresses, and other personal details of a number of prominent figures, including some whose homes or work premises were the targets of devices on this list of explosions. These include the Home Secretary, Robert Carr, and the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, John Davies. Drafts of communiques were found in the handwriting of the defendants. Stencils were found which had been used for copying, and so were carbons.
Item: the statement made by Miss Elizabeth Wilson, housekeeper to Sir John Tate, neighbour of John Davies, regarding a parcel found outside the door of Mr. Davies's flat on Saturday the 31st of July, 1971. Quote, "It was the size and shape of an ordinary shoebox, and it was done up with a pretty gift paper of blue and orange colour and design, and the parcel was tied with ribbon in the same colour. On top was a rosette such as one can buy these days for putting on gift parcels. A few moments later, as I stood on the landing, there was a loud explosion. I was dazed and deafened and discovered that I was bleeding profusely from the leg."
Part of the case will involve discussion of this series of explosions and of the manufacture, the makeup, and nature of the bombs, or infernal machines which caused them. You will hear details of how these devices were associated and of materials which link these particular devices to the defendants and the premises at Amherst Road. In short, you will hear sufficient evidence to completely and utterly connect the defendants with conspiracy to cause anyway some of the explosions.
I think...
The judge, Justice James.
I think everybody accepts that people in the dock may not agree with the evidence that is being put before the jury by way of opening. But you will all have an opportunity of giving your version, if you want to give it, at an appropriate time. It is hard enough for the jury to sit here and take it in, so please, if you would, try and control yourselves and do not interrupt.
Look, it is difficult.
We won't have any argument. Just try and control yourselves, if you would.
John Matthew continues.
Members of the jury, I will now call the evidence before you.
Item: the list of locations in the left-hand column of the bomb chart. 8. Site for police station, Paddington Green, London. 10. A private address in Chelsea Square, London. 16. BBC outside broadcast van, Miss World contest, Albert Hall, London. 18. A private house, Barnet, the home of Robert Carr. 19. Ford Motor Company, Gants Hill, Essex. 20. Bieber Boutique, Kensington, London. 21. Police computer, Tintagel House, London. 24. An apartment block, Putney, London. Location of the flat of John Davies. 25. Territorial Army Drill Hall, Holloway, London. Item: a black and white photograph of a large, bow-fronted, 3-story Georgian terraced house. A railing runs along the pavement in front of the house with a carriage lamp above the gateway. Under the lamp stand 2 policemen. In the road stands a 1960s Jaguar saloon. The windscreen of the car is smashed and glass litters the bonnet and the road. The windows of the house are also variously damaged. The house is the home of Robert Carr, the Conservative Home Secretary. Commander Bond, head of the recently formed bomb squad, is cross-examined by Ian MacDonald for the defence.
Commander Bond, what kind of people were the Angry Brigade? What kind of organisation was it?
I don't know. I regard the Angry Brigade as an idea that anyone can join.
An idea? Not an organisation?
No, sir. I don't accept it as an organisation.
So, you don't know how, if it is an organisation, that it's actually organised?
No.
Don't know if it has a membership, constitution, chairman, secretary, treasurer?
I don't, and I doubt if those gentlemen you speak of exist.
You don't know what its aims and objectives were?
I have a good idea.
So you don't know if any of the people you have arrested are members.
Their membership is established by our inquiries.
Oh, so we're now in the position that you do actually know that it has a membership.
Well, of course it has a membership.
Why?
Because if there were no members, it wouldn't exist.
Am I understanding you right to say that you have come to regard the expression Angry Brigade as a name given to an idea or philosophy that anybody can subscribe to if they want to, and that those people you call members?
Yes, it is not like a gang of ordinary criminals that we know all the members and could set out to arrest them. This is an idea, and we only establish membership by our inquiries and arrests in this case.
Item, a video recording. 2 young women sit on a lawn on a warm afternoon. The camera frames them tightly. The young woman on the left looks uncertain, pained, intense. The young woman on the right is loquacious, animated, amused. An unseen interviewer asks questions to which the young woman on the right, Anna Mendelsohn, gives lengthy and detailed answers. The young woman on the left, Hilary Creek, says very little. Ian MacDonald continues for the defence.
I want to go to the bombings in which there were communiques with the Angry Brigade stamp involved. Perhaps you could have an explosive schedule to help you and turn to page 6 of it. The first bombing in which there is any suggestion that the Angry Brigade might be involved is explosion number 6 at the Albert Hall.
That is according to the communique.
Yes, that is what I mean. And that related to a BBC van at the time when the Miss World competition was being held. The next item is number 17 at the Department of Employment and Productivity on the 9th of December 1970. That was the department that was responsible for the drafting of the Industrial Relations Bill that it's going through Parliament.
Yes.
And I think it's a well-known fact that Robert Carr was the minister in charge of the department at the time, and indeed until fairly recently.
Yes.
And it is right that at the time when the bomb was placed in the Department of Employment and Productivity, around the 9th of December, that was a time of enormous protest against the Industrial Relations Bill.
That is true.
And it is right that on the 8th of December, the day before, that the police were notified that 50,000 members of the trade union movement would be holding a march and a demonstration against the bill.
I know there were demonstrations.
And going to the next explosion, number 18, which was the one at Mr. Carr's house on the 21st of January 1971, is it right that the day that the bomb went off was another day of protest against the Industrial Relations Bill?
Yes, that is correct.
You see, wouldn't it be right, Commander Bond, that any number of those between 50 and 70,000 people that took part in those demonstrations of protest would have had a motive to place bombs in the Department of Employment and Productivity or Mr. Carr's house?
If they were so politically motivated, it doesn't follow that all the people at the demonstration would take the acts of violence.
But there you have a body of people who might have the motives, even if they did not have the inclination to do that kind of thing.
Yes.
On the last of the bombings on the bombing schedule, explosion number 25 is the Territorial Army Drill Hall in Parkhurst Road. Could you see from the explosion schedule on the column letters and communiques, there is a blank. And yesterday we touched on this in relation to the Angry Brigade Moonlighter Cell communique, which followed explosion number 25.
Yes, sir.
Item, a typewritten document. Quote, 230 imprisoned without charge or trial. The 6 occupied counties of Ireland are terrorized by gunmen in khaki. We warn all unemployed brothers and sisters, do not be fooled by the army recruiting campaign. An army career isn't fun in the sun and learning a useful trade. If you join, you'll be trained in Belfast, Derry, and all the other working-class ghettos in Northern Ireland to murder and brutalize ordinary working-class people. Communique, Angry Brigade Moonlighters Cell, 15th of August, 1971.
In your evidence, you stated that it was your opinion that the communique was in fact connected with the bombing of the Territorial Army drill hall?
As far as I was concerned, this was a communique accepting responsibility for the bombing.
But what reference is there here to any bombing at all?
It is a tirade against the army recruiting system, and the bombing of the hall was a protest against the troops in Northern Ireland.
And it is right that about this time that internment was introduced in Northern Ireland?
About this time, yes.
Do you have evidence, Commander Bond, that subsequent attacks on army buildings are the work of the people in the dock?
No, sir.
And it is right that there were subsequent attacks on army buildings?
2, to my knowledge.
I want to turn to the course of the inquiry that you conducted into the various bomb incidents. Would it be right to say that it was the bombing of Robert Carr's house in January 1971 that really set in train what has obviously been high-level investigations?
That was the commencement of it.
And it is right that so far as the earlier explosions from number 16 onwards, that is the Miss World competition, the BBC van, and the Department of Employment and Productivity, very little publicity had been given for these prior to the bombing of Mr. Carr's house. At any rate, when the explosion took place at Mr. Carr's house, that rocketed into the headlines the existence of the Angry Brigade, and also related was the disclosure of previous bombings in Britain?
Yes. The Robert Carr bombing was very serious.
Here you have a cabinet minister whose house is bombed, and there is massive headline publicity from it, and it is accorded a massive police hunt.
The level of investigation would have been accorded to any other bombing.
But isn't it right that after Mr. Harold Wilson said that it was a major crime that had to be investigated and the people responsible brought to book, something more was done?
Commander Bond, did you conduct your investigation from a criminal or political point of view?
From a criminal one.
I suggest it wasn't an ordinary criminal investigation. When you have a crime of what appears to be a politically motivated attack on a minister, surely one of the first things you consider is what sort of people would have that political motivation. And the people who specialize in collecting that kind of information is the special branch.
They investigate matters of that sort.
And what happened next was that you proceeded to do a whole lot of raids on people who had that kind of political view.
A whole lot of people.
The fact is that there were people whose homes were raided who you had nothing against other than the fact that they were known to be members of certain organizations or who had certain political beliefs. When you were accorded to the Special Investigation Squad, your special orders were they not, that the Angry Brigade must be smashed?
Those orders were never given to me.
Were they given by you?
No, sir.
Is it not the case that additional pressure was put upon your investigation squad by the Cabinet?
I was under no pressure from anyone.
Item: a scene from a This Week television documentary made in the early 1970s. A group of students argue with an interviewer over their political beliefs. On a bed, listening to this, sits a young man, withdrawn from the conversation, with a distracted air. This is the defendant, John Barker. In court, he cross-examines Commander Bond.
There were no Angry Brigade attacks on ordinary people? They weren't aimed at ordinary people?
I think it depends on how you determine ordinary people. Do you regard William Batty as a person in authority?
Would you say that the managing director of the Ford Motor Company in Europe was an ordinary person?
I would regard him as such.
Wouldn't a better description of the attacks be that some of them were against people with a lot of money and with a lot of power?
I would say the combination of all, persons with authority, persons in positions, persons with money.
And there were very specific attacks on the government.
On members of the government, yes.
And it was for this reason that the Angry Brigade was dangerous? Not because of the immense amount of damage that was caused by it?
The Angry Brigade were dangerous because of the series of bombings they had embarked upon. I'm quite sure that sooner or later we'd have had someone killed. In fact, one lady was seriously injured as a result of one bomb. I think this was the most important danger.
I suggest that what was thought to be dangerous about the Angry Brigade was not the small amount of explosive used, but the kinds of people their bombs were aimed at.
No, the principal danger was the seriousness of the incidents.
In court, John Barker then questions Bond regarding Bond's interrogation of him, the circumstances of the arrest of the 4 defendants, and the discovery of guns and explosives in a hold-all at Amherst Road.
You were present, along with Sergeant Davies, who was making notes.
Yes.
Page 440. You remember seeing the hold-all. The answer written down is yes, but I said that I had never seen it before.
Your recorded answer is yes.
You went on to say, was it there when you looked around the flat 6 weeks ago?
It would have been recorded.
You did say it, and it wasn't recorded. You went on to ask, was it there when you took over the flat 6 weeks ago? I replied that it seems a peculiar thing, doesn't it?
Yes.
You realise that it was a sarcastic reply.
It could be such.
I said that your officers put it there.
You never said that at all, Mr. Barker.
You have a considerable degree of power and control in that it is you and your officers who are taking the notes. And there is no independent witness present of what the written evidence is as to what was said in the police station.
The notes of the interview were taken by Davies in my presence and in the presence of Chief Inspector Wilson.
You never gave me those notes to read, nor asked me whether I agreed that they were a true record.
No, I didn't.
Davies has the power to put in or leave things out if he wants to. He is the person with the pen and there is nobody there to contradict him.
Davies is an experienced officer. I'm convinced he made an accurate note.
Item: a photograph of a young woman. The photograph is black and white. The woman has shoulder-length curly hair. In her left hand, she holds a cigarette between her index and middle fingers. She wears a flower-patterned blouse. This is Anna Mendelsohn. Anna Mendelsohn cross-examines Commander Bond.
Commander Bond, you have referred to the Angry Brigade as anarchists or self-styled revolutionaries. What does self-styled mean?
Adopting a style of your own.
Or does that mean that all revolutionaries set up a style of their own? Like setting up a business?
It could be, if that business was bombing.
So you think that at some point we decided we would be anarchists?
You decided to adopt that line?
What line?
The line of anarchy by enforcing your opinions on others by acts of violence.
That is what you think of as an anarchist? Anarchists and self-styled revolutionaries are the same thing?
They are anarchists.
What evidence do you have of us setting ourselves up as anarchists?
The evidence before this court quite clearly shows that you were grouped together for this campaign against authority, and after all, if that is not anarchy, I don't know what is.
When you say that we were grouped together, do you mean that everybody in this dock is grouped together?
Yes.
Do you mean we are working together as a group?
I'm saying you are working together in this conspiracy.
Item: a photograph of another young woman. She's sitting at a table, looking past the camera. Her mouth is slightly open, revealing a gap between her 2 front teeth. She has a center parting, and her hair falls away to curls at shoulder height. On the right, her hair hangs partly across her eye. She wears a scoop-necked dark top, the sleeves of which are elbow length. Her left forearm rests on the table. In her right hand rests a pen. This is Hilary Creek. Hilary Creek cross-examines Commander Bond.
You said that the Angry Brigade are the people you've arrested. Do you believe that?
What I said is that those people I have arrested are members of the Angry Brigade.
Is it because of that that you feel it is only a small group of people?
It has nothing to do with the group. I'm only concerned with the evidence I have when I say this, that those in the dock are, in my opinion, members of the Angry Brigade.
It isn't a crime, is it?
To be simply a member or supporter of, no, it is how you demonstrate that support.
You said it was your opinion that only a small number of people would resort to political violence.
You ask a question, I give you my truthful opinion, that the number of people who would resort to violence to enforce their political views is small.
But if you believe that, it would affect the way the investigation was run, because it was based on looking into a small group of people.
No, the group of people in the dock have been brought there because of evidence as a result of my inquiries. My inquiry is still going on, and it could well be that at a later date other people will be arrested.
The investigation has concentrated on possibly 100 people. The scope of your inquiries was small.
This was the object of the investigation, to eliminate suspects and get down to the hard core.
Item, a hardback book. The cover is red. The book is fairly old, its binding split. It has a typewritten label on the spine with a reference number on it. The label is covered in clear plastic. The title of the book is The Angry Brigade. The name of the author is Gordon Carr. On page 181 of the book, the author states that the, quote, cross-examination of the officers involved in the arrests was crucial to the defense. On a personal level, it was by far the most bitterly contested part of the trial. Sergeant Gillam, who led the raid, was on the witness stand for a week. His account of what happened was straightforward enough. He and the other officers entered the flat and were in the main bedroom for 3 or 4 minutes while Mendelsohn and Greenfield were arrested and taken downstairs to a police car in the street. Gillam and Sergeant Davies began to search the place. In the space of a couple of minutes, they had found the explosives, the guns, and the ammunition. Barker and Creek were then arrested and taken downstairs to wait for a police car. This version of the raid was supported by Sergeant Davies. John Barker claimed that as soon as Mendelsohn and Greenfield were taken out of the flat, he and Hilary Creek followed. After a 5 or 6 minute wait, they were taken back upstairs, and only then were they confronted with the material. The inference was, of course, that in this time the police had spread the material around the flat, having brought it up previously in 2 holdalls. Sergeant Davis's retort to this suggestion was
utter rubbish.
It's not utter rubbish, Mr. Davies. It's the truth, isn't it?
It is not. It's utter rubbish.
So you're saying that we were never taken down twice, but Mendelsohn and Greenfield were taken down and we were kept there?
Yes, that is true.
That is a lie, Mr. Davies.
It is not, Mr. Barker.
In fact, Mr. Davies, your whole description of the raid is a total fabrication. Now, I'm now going to tell you exactly what did happen in that room, which you know as well as I do, Mr. Davies.
We both know the truth, Mr. Barker, and I am telling the truth.
No, I am telling the truth, Mr. Davies. After about 6 or 7 minutes after you'd first entered, it is only then that Anna and Jim are taken down. And then Mr. Woolard and some other officers then take us downstairs, that's Hilary and myself, without charging us or anything. We are then taken down the stairs.
No, you were not.
So you would say that it's impossible, would you, that Jim, Anna, Hilary and myself were, about 8 minutes after the raid started, all together, all 4 of us, in the hallway downstairs? You say that's impossible?
I would say that was impossible. But of course I wasn't there. I was up in the flat.
So for all you know, Anna and Jim might have been kept down in the hallway for about 20 minutes.
They were taken out of the flat and taken to Albany Street Police Station.
I put it to you, Mr. Davies, that in fact what really happened was that Hilary and I were brought back about 5 or 6 minutes later after we had been taken down. And that then you proceed to find things with the speed of a silent film, all in the space of about 3 minutes.
Utterly untrue.
Well, you just said you found most of the things in about 2 or 3 minutes.
I'm answering your questions because you said that Hilary and I were brought back after 5 or 6 minutes and then you began to find things. That is not so. We found the property in your presence in that room before you were taken away.
That is not true, Mr. Davies. You see, Mr. Davies, that all depends. That bit of your story all depends on us being taken down once. And Sergeant Woolard has told this court on oath that we were taken down twice. What have you got to say about that?
I didn't see you when you did come back up. I can't disbelieve Woolard. I don't know if you were or not. I didn't see you. I didn't hear you.
Incredible. But you just said it was a pack of lies, what I put to you. You said you didn't see us come back.
He said, Mr. Barker, in fact, that it was a pack of lies. The items were found quickly after the 2 in the flat had been taken down. I think perhaps I ought to remind you that when Mr. Woolard was giving evidence on that part of the story, There were some parts of his evidence you yourself accused him of lying.
That's quite true. Quite true. What I'm suggesting is that there's pretty big inconsistencies between two different sets of lies. And I've been asking you to explain now, Mr. Davies, and, of course, as you usually do when you're in a corner, you say you can't remember. You didn't see it. That's true, isn't it?
No.
Your statements are all identical. They all read exactly the same, word for word. In fact, when you give your statements, you're like three parrots. You go through the same notebook and out come the same words. Everything happens in the same sequence. All of it is totally unreal in a ludicrous way. That's true, isn't it?
Mr. Barker, that's not a question, you know. It's a comment. You're perfectly entitled to make that comment to the jury in your summing up.
Ian MacDonald, QC, now leads the defence case.
Members of the jury, I will now open the case for the defence. There are 25 bombings alleged as part of the conspiracy count, and apart from 3 of those, the police and the prosecution haven't got a clue who actually planted them. Probably no one will have a clue who the real bombers are until they write their memoirs, if they do. One reason I'm going to suggest to you why motive becomes important is because there is so little concrete evidence in this case of who actually did the bombings. It's the same as far as motive is concerned in the possession charges. Obviously, people don't have in their possession submachine guns or explosives, as the prosecution say these did, without having some reason for it. If you yourselves were in the position of the police and had to convince a jury that people had machine guns in their flat, then an obvious and important way of doing it is to show that the people you have in the dock have the right political motive. Finding people with the right political motives has been one of the main focuses of the police investigation into the Angry Brigade bombings, and that is the role that the Special Branch Police, led by Commander Bond, have had in this case. That is why the trial becomes a political trial, because the prosecution have to present in evidence before you what the people in the dock think. That is why the trial is a trial out of the ordinary. Everything when you come into court seems to revolve around the judge. He is the person who gives directions in relation to procedure. He is the person who, when he comes into court, we all stand up. When he sits down, we sit down. It may feel that all the power in the court is centered on him sitting up there in an elevated position halfway up the wall. You may feel that you are not the people who have all the power. But when the judge is summing up at the end of the case, if you think what he is saying is a lot of nonsense, you must ignore it.
They can't. Not on the law.
But his view of the facts, you can. That is your power. I want to remind you that, so far as the rest of us in this courtroom are concerned, you are the most powerful of any of us. You probably realize by now that the verdict you have to give in this trial is a concern to more people than simply the relatives of the people in the dock there. You probably realize that the whole British establishment awaits your verdict with bated breath, and you and the defendants, when you really consider it, are the only unpredictable factors in this whole scenario.
Item, a black and white photograph apparently taken candidly. The picture shows a doorway in which a young man stands, looking to his left. Only his head and torso can be seen. He wears a jacket. One collar of his open-necked shirt protrudes over his jacket lapel. He has wiry hair and long sideburns. He seems to be stooping. He looks tired and anxious. The picture gives the impression of arrested motion, as though he were being led somewhere. This is James Greenfield, in custody. Ian MacDonald takes James Greenfield through his evidence.
After leaving Cambridge University, I spent some time working on a building site and then in a factory. I then moved to Hackney and started working with the squatters movement. To actually keep a squat going, you have to be able to handle a load of legal formalities like writs of eviction. And then the place has to be protected against landlords, bailiffs, the police, who are not renowned for using kid-glove tactics. It was through this that I decided to attend a large meeting of activists in Wigan in February to discuss the start of a new magazine. I joined a group which worked on a section of the magazine called The Repression Industry, mainly because I had lived in Notting Hill. And my experiences, particularly of the police around Notting Hill, well, they were like nothing I'd ever come across in my life before. It's nothing to be stopped, searched twice a day. The work consisted of analysing the implications of the various political laws that the government was passing. The most obvious was the Industrial Relations Bill. The magazine, called Strike, took some months to come out. There are only about 15 people working on it, including Anna, John and Hilary. It was something of a failure, so we went on to other research projects such as when you look at power and when you look at government, very often you're tempted to say in very, very general terms that it works in a certain way. Governments work because precisely it involves people who have got their own loyalties. And in this way, for instance, actually I think it'd be important to know if, say, a particular High Court judge was a member of various clubs which, say, particular members of the government are members of, and hence they mix together every day.
I gather you are explaining that it would be of interest and importance, in your view, to find out, in particular, whether judges were members of such and such a club and lived at such and such an address, because then you could fit them in against a background of next-door neighbours and various club members. Is that it?
Yeah. And that research, which we continued after we moved into Amherst Road, is the basic documentary evidence which the prosecution is using to show conspiracy. It was then that two people who I subsequently learned were either part of or very close to the Angry Brigade visited us. I wouldn't name them. It was with them that we drafted and duplicated the one statement on internment which was signed by the Angry Brigade moonlighters cell. It never mentioned any bombing, and I certainly wasn't party to any conspiracy to cause explosions then or any other time.
Greenfield is cross-examined by Matthew.
Well, Mr. Greenfield, who are these two mysterious people who suddenly turn up at Amherst Road?
I don't intend to tell you.
Why is that?
Because I don't feel they should be put in the same position I'm in now.
But it is they who have largely contributed, if there is a word of truth in what you say. They are the people who have largely contributed to you being where you are today.
The people who are responsible for putting me where I am today are the policemen who planted all the stuff.
All the incriminating property found at Amherst Road, yes. Why do you wish to protect them, Mr. Greenfield?
I wish to protect them because criticism aside of the Angry Brigade, what they may have done, what they may have had in mind, criticism of that aside, in opposition to you, they're on my side.
Terrorists?
No, I wouldn't say they're terrorists, but it is open to debate.
Now, Communique 11. This appears to relate to the Robert Carr bombing.
It mentions Davies. It doesn't actually say anything about the bombing.
The occasion that this came to be printed in your flat was on the Saturday afternoon of the bombing?
I assume it was.
That was when your duplicator was borrowed?
Yeah.
You won't name the two people you say came round on this occasion, but tell me this. Were they people you knew very well?
I had met them about a month previous. They've been around several times.
So, here they are, using your flat to print the communique, and leaving evidence about the flat as to what they had done.
Yeah.
Now, tell us the truth. Here, out of the blue, are two people, and they tell you that they are responsible, or partly responsible, for the Davies bombing. You, in fact, were a party to the making of that bomb, weren't you?
No.
You, Mr. Greenfield, using violence by bombing. If you thought that might have helped your ideals, would you have resorted to it?
I wasn't interested in advancing my ideals.
I thought you had been telling us very little else for the past 2 days. You left university and did very little work just to do this.
What I've done is attempting over the last few years to live and act in a way that is what I would call socialist. I'm not interested in propagating my ideals.
Anna Mendelsohn makes a statement in her own defense.
My family is Jewish. They fled from the Russian pogroms in the early 1900s. They came to England. Some got off the boat at Liverpool, others made it to Brooklyn. They moved inland to Stockport and settled there. You know the things that become part of you from the moment you were born. Experiences your parents had which are passed on to you. There are things I will never forget. Like my mother after the war working with refugees. Children who'd lost all their families. She talked a lot about that. When I was a kid, I couldn't believe that a man like Hitler actually existed. And how she relived the times with me when she would stay with them all night, giving them the love and warmth which had been driven out of them. And I will never forget that. And so, when we come to something like internment, I felt all these things inside me when that happened. These things I'd learned from my own life, my own history, my own experiences. And I felt very deeply about it. And if, in the prosecution mind, writing those last few lines in this communique or statement or whatever you want to call it here, if that is relevant to the charge of conspiring to cause explosions, and I want to say and repeat again and again that as far as I'm concerned, and was concerned at that time, this statement has absolutely nothing to do with any explosion. Internment, rounding people up, putting people in camps was more important to me than seeing somebody coming around to our flat with a stamp which said Angry Brigade Moonlighter's Cell and stamping it on the bottom. It was internment which was important to me.
Matthew cross-examines Mendelsohn.
On the 31st of July, the Davies bombing took place. By that stage, the four of you were living at Amherst Road?
Yes.
Do you remember the weekend of the Davies bombing?
Yes.
This was the Saturday afternoon that these two persons came round to your flat, and that the four of you there all got out of the flat for the afternoon and early evening and allowed them to use the duplicating machine and so on. I don't suppose there's any chance of you telling us who these two persons were.
Right. Not after what you've done.
The reason why you won't is it is a complete make-up from start to finish.
It is not.
On the 11th of August, these two persons returned. In the meantime, the Davies bomb had gone off. On the 11th, they came round for the purpose of making copies of some statement about internment?
Yes. They came round with some draft they intended to put out as a statement. That was when they told us it was a statement from the Angry Brigade.
Well, you knew that the Angry Brigade was holding themselves responsible for the most terrible bombings, one of which took place a fortnight before at Davies's house.
I knew they claimed that bombing.
And you knew they claimed the bomb that had gone off at Robert Carr's house and several others?
Yes.
And here were two people in your flat saying they wanted to issue a statement on behalf of the Angry Brigade?
Yes.
Did you show them the door?
No.
Why not?
I told you how I felt about internment.
Well, these two people were obviously people intimately connected with the Angry Brigade, weren't they?
That wasn't obvious, no.
Miss Mendelsohn, are you really saying that?
I did not know how they were connected with the Angry Brigade.
Of course, you didn't know the exact details, but you realized that they were.
They said to me they were going to put out a statement from the Angry Brigade on internment. That is what I knew.
And I suppose you asked them. The Angry Brigade are the people who have done all these bombings. Didn't you ask them?
The question I asked them about it was, is this going to be connected with a bombing? And they said no. I read it, and I didn't like some of the statements in the end of it.
We will come to that.
Objection. She's trying to answer the question.
Mr. MacDonald, you are not representing her. I am representing her interests.
I've noticed there have been several times when she's been interrupted.
I have noticed that you do it when witnesses are in difficulty.
I have noticed that you do it when prosecution witnesses are in difficulty.
One question was asked. You asked them whether this statement was to be connected with any bombings because you wish to disassociate yourself with any bombings or people connected with bombings.
Yes.
You were shown the explosives at the police station. What did you say when you were shown them and told that they had been found in the flat?
Nothing.
Why?
I couldn't get any words out of my mouth.
Item: a handwritten entry in a notebook contemporaneous with the trial. Day 12, Friday, June the 16th, 1971. Birthday cake presented Anna. Item: the text of an indoors play called Education and the Worrying Class, written by John Barker and Jim Greenfield. The opening of the text reads as follows. There are two actors. One is planted in the audience in a focal position. The other marches round in a circle rhythmically chanting, Education and the Worrying Class. He goes up to the planted actor and awards him a B.A. The other replies, Bah, and follows around the circle, also chanting. Matthew cross-examines Barker.
As we know, and perhaps it is unnecessary to look at the document, but you can if you want to, on page 106, at some stage you wrote down J.D., John Davies, ex-Minister for Trade and Industry, and then his address and telephone number.
Yes, that is correct.
Are you going to say that you wrote that down to have an argument with him about his lame duck policy? Did you really think you could tap the Minister of the Crown's telephone and that you could argue with him?
If that is naive, I think it is a situation that ought to be changed.
Yeah. You think you should be able to ring a Minister of the Crown and question him about what he is doing?
Well, he should be responsible to the people and be ready to give explanations as to his policies.
On Friday, November the 3rd, 1972, John Matthew begins his closing statements.
People, whoever they are, should be able to go to their homes without being exposed to lethal explosions which blow up their houses. Elderly ladies should be able to walk out of their flats in Putney without ending up in hospital with pieces of bombs in their legs. That is my sort of law and order. I hope that it is your sort of law and order, members of the jury. And I would be so bold as to suggest that it is. My concern now is to deal with the 4 arrested at Amherst Road in August 1971. The reality of this case is that they stand all 4 together. As far as these 4 are concerned, one of the main questions to be asked is that of truthfulness, not accuracy of the prosecution witnesses. And the greatest concern in the quest for truthfulness is undoubtedly the police and the evidence they gave. It was inevitable that they should become the main target for the defense. Virtually the entire Special Branch bomb squad has been accused of lying, of illegal acts, harassing, assault. And, of course, the culmination is the allegation, as far as dishonesty is concerned, that all this property, including explosives, was planted by the police at Amherst Road. An act so bold and of such magnitude as to be almost beyond comprehension.
MacDonald closes for James Greenfield.
When people at high levels start covering up the misdeeds of those under their command, it doesn't simply have legal and moral consequences, it also has political consequences. You've heard Barker talking about the real conspirators in our society. He's given evidence, and so have the other defendants, about the research they were doing into power. Their evidence has been pooh-poohed by the prosecution, and maybe even some of you thought he was mad putting forth things like that. But is he? Is this defense as unbelievable as the prosecution would have it?
Anna Mendelsohn makes a closing statement on her own behalf.
I have to answer the allegation that I was party to a conspiracy. To understand my arguments, you have to understand the way I live and the political work I've been doing. Only through this can you see why it was that I was planted with guns and explosives and charged with conspiracy. The prosecution has produced against me the lines they say I wrote for the Angry Brigade Moonlighters' cell communique. I admit, it was printed on the duplicator found at Amherst Road. But there was no evidence to suggest that the cell communique was connected to a bombing. Many people were very angry over the British government's introduction of internment without trial in Northern Ireland. I helped in the production of a statement against it because of these deep feelings. And that was more important than the whys and wherefores of the politics of the Angry Brigade. None of us who lived at Amherst Road have ever denied contact with people who said they were the Angry Brigade. We knew many people whom the police had investigated as a result of the bombings. We were obvious targets for a plant because of this. Our sort of people, our politics, the people living in Amherst Road, we didn't and we don't feel that there is any need or room for bomb attacks on cabinet ministers, although we might understand the feelings behind them. If you convict us, we are not going to change. We will still be who we are and what we believe. I know the people in this dock with me are working together for a happier and more peaceful world. That is who we are. It is your decision.
John Barker makes his own closing statement.
I have waited, sometimes patiently, sometimes not, to put my side of things to the people who matter. Because you are the 12 independent people who live in the real world, and you are the people with power. You are the first people I have come across in any of the courts who have the power to acquit or convict. So the question of the plant is one for you. The appearance of arresting people is as important, if not more important, than actually smashing the Angry Brigade itself. It is the whole question of setting an example, showing people that they can't get away with it, and so on.
On Thursday, November the 23rd, 1972, the 100th day of the trial, Justice James begins his summing up.
Members of the jury, I will be many days in my summary of the evidence in this case, although to sum up the entire 6 months of this trial would be virtually impossible. When you make up your minds on the witnesses, you should do so on the basis of truth, accuracy, and credibility, because some people are lying in this case, members of the jury, and there is no getting away from it. It is up to the prosecution to prove their case. Guilt must be proven not as to whether it was beyond a reasonable doubt, but whether you are sure. You should first of all take the charges of possession of explosives against the defendants. Then you should consider the counts which relate to the possession of machine guns and detonators. The prosecution say the possession charges are made out, that you cannot accept as even reasonably possible the massive dishonesty that would be involved in so many police officers, from high to low rank, involving such a significant coincidence in what was planted in the flat and what was found there otherwise. If you decide that the police quite wickedly planted these things in the flat, then you could find the defendants not guilty. Finally, after considering all the evidence, you should look at the charge of conspiracy. Conspiracy is a difficult offense to make a judgment on. Conspiracy can be effected by a wink or a nod without a word being exchanged. The crucial point in relation to conspiracy is the agreement. In this case, it is a conspiracy to cause explosions. As long as you know what the agreement is, then you are a conspirator. Although the prosecution said all 25 bombings came from one source, all the jury has to find is one conspiracy within, and I underline within, the 3-year period. Don't let prejudice and sympathy cloud your judgment. Think not of your task as the exercise of some power. Think of it rather as exercising your right, which this country gives to you, to arrive at guilt or innocence. This is not a political trial. Political trials are trials of people for their political beliefs. We don't have them in this country.
Item: 2 pages of a defence team legal notebook. The pages are yellowing. On them are 2 widely spaced columns of letters written in blue biro. At the top of the left-hand page, above the columns, the heading 5:10 p.m., 6th of December, 1972. Jury returns is written in the same hand and heavily underlined. The columns read down the left-hand page. Initials are hurriedly scribbled instead of the full names. Under count 1, the charge of conspiracy to cause explosions, the columns read: James Greenfield, guilty. Anna Mendelsohn, guilty. John Barker, guilty. Hilary Creek, guilty. Under count 5, the charge of possessing explosives, they read: James Greenfield, guilty. Anna Mendelsohn, guilty. John Barker, guilty. Hilary Creek, guilty. At the end of the verdicts, The jury foreman makes an unprecedented request.
We have acquitted 4 of the defendants, and in the case of those who have been convicted, us members of the jury would like to ask your lordship for leniency or clemency or whatever it is. I'm not a man of great words, but that is what I'd like to ask for.
And Judge James passes sentence.
The conspiracy of which you have been convicted had as its object the intention of disrupting and attacking the democratic society of this country. That was the way it was put by the Crown, and that is the way it has been proved to the satisfaction of the jury. Once the suggestions of planting of evidence had been got rid of on overwhelming evidence. The philosophies which you subscribe to are those which are set out in the various Angry Brigade communiques. The means that you adopted could have been even more lethal than they were. But I am satisfied on the evidence that the devices you used were not deliberately designed to cause death or serious injury, but rather damage to property. Fortunately, only one person suffered any injury. There is, however, evidence that it is fortunate that no one was killed. I am not going to lecture you. I am sorry to see such educated people in your situation. Undoubtedly, a warped understanding of sociology has brought you to the state in which you are. The jury have asked me to take a course which will show mercy. There are limits to which a court can give effect to such a recommendation, but I will to the utmost that I think right. Undoubtedly, you have, in many of your interests, sought to do good, and have done good, and I count that in your favor. But when all is said and done, the public is entitled to protection. Everyone must know that anyone who seeks to behave in this manner, holding explosives and weapons, must expect severe punishment. I am going to reduce the totality of the sentences by reasons of the jury's recommendation by 5 years. You will each go to prison for 10 years.
Item: a black and white photograph of a wall of a building. The caption below the photograph identifies the building as the Old Bailey. On the wall is written in white paint, in large, clear letters, "Whose conspiracy?" Item: an image on an aging microfilm reader. The sloping screen refracts this light and inverts the image to allow to be read a negative image of a double-page tabloid newspaper spread. The pages being viewed are pages of the Sun newspaper dated December 1972. The headline reads, "Downfall of the Big Head Brigade."
The Trial of the Angry Brigade was written by Graham White. Juliet Stevenson was the narrator. Gerard McDermott was John Matthew. Peter Marinka, Justice James. Ian Masters, Howard Yallop. Mark Strong, Ian MacDonald. Kenneth Cranham, Commander Bond. Tom Hiddleston, John Barker. Helen Longworth, Anna Mendelsohn. Fiona Clarke, Hilary Creek. And Carl Prekopp, James Greenfield. The director was Peter Kavanagh.